Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. I'm Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library. So glad you could join me today for this reading of War of the Worlds. And today we are reading Chapter 17. Just a quick recap on what's going on. Um, the Martians have come. They are wielding their main weapons, which are the heat ray, and now there is a black mist that they are releasing, said to be a very heavy, dense mist that fills in the valleys and fills the ground and seeps into houses, and it is deadly if anyone breathes it. So, uh, even for apparently for the Martians, because the Martians have the ability to spray the areas of the black mist after they have done their duty to basically purify it. So um, that's where we stand right now. We're looking at this story from two different perspectives. The main narrator, who is supposed to be the author, right, the person who is telling us this tale of their lives. And then the last few chapters have been from the brother's perspective, the narrator's brother, who lives in London, and he is kind of having his own separate adventure because the Martians are now in their tripods. They are moving across the land, and they are systematically taking over sections of England through London and the surrounding areas. And so, since our narrator is off in the country where the first one first landed, um, he is now looking at this from the perspective of the brother, who is in a different part of London and seeing a whole different aspect of this. And of course, what we're seeing is, large groups of people kind of all crushed together, kind of moving as one to escape London. The roads are crowded, and of course, whenever you have large groups of people fighting for their lives to escape, then there is people behaving badly towards each other, and some people are being killed, and some people are being run over, and some people are um, having a rough time of it. So it's 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 getting to be kind of a dark story of survival. And right now, the brother, which we'll read about him today as well, the brother is actually traveling with two women, a married woman who is looking for her husband, who said he would meet up with her again, but of course he's never been seen, and then the sister of the woman. So Mrs. and Miss Elphinstone are traveling with them, and they have a small cart being pulled by a pony, and so that's where we'll begin. And if you are ready, hello to Arlene, hello to Adrian. Thank you for joining for the our next chapter of War of the Worlds. And if you are ready, uh, start chapter 17, entitled The Thunder Child. Had the Martians aimed only at destruction, they might on Monday have annihilated the entire population of London, as it spread itself slowly through the home counties, not only along the road through Barnet, but also through Edgware and Waltham Abbey, and along the roads eastward and south end to eastward to Southend and Shoeburyness, and south of the Thames to Deal and Broadstairs poured the same frantic route. If one could have hung that June morning in a balloon in the blazing blue above London, every northward and eastward road running out of the tangled maze of streets would have seemed stippled black with the streaming fugitives, each dot a human agony of terror and physical distress. I have set forth at length in the last chapter my brother's account of the road through Chipping Barnet, in order that my readers may realize that the swarming of black dots appeared to one of those concerned. Never before in the history of the world had such a mass of human beings moved and suffered together. The legendary hosts of Goths and Huns, the hugest armies Asia has ever seen, would have been but a drop in that current. And this was no disciplined march. It was a stampede gigantic and terrible, without order and without a goal. 6 million people, unarmed and unprovisioned, driving headlong. It was the beginning of the rout of civilization, of the massacre of mankind. Directly below him, the balloonist would have seen the network of streets, far and wide, houses, churches, squares, crescents, gardens, already derelict, spread out like a huge map, and in the southward, blotted. Over Ealing, Richmond, Wimbledon, it would have seemed as if some monstrous pen had flung ink upon the chart. Steadily, incessantly, each black splash grew and spread, shooting out this way and that, now banking itself against rising ground, now pouring swiftly over a crest and into a new-found valley, exactly as a gout of ink would spread itself upon blotting paper. And beyond, over the blue hills that rise southward of the river, the glittering Martians sent to and fro, calmly and methodically spreading their poison cloud over this patch of country, and then over that, laying it again with their steam jets when it had served its purpose, and taking possession of the conquered country. They do not seem to have aimed at extermination so much as at complete demoralization and the destruction of any opposition. They exploded any stores of powder they came upon, cut every telegraph, and wrecked the railways here and there. They were hamstringing mankind. They seemed in no hurry to extend the field of their operations, and did not come beyond the central part of London all that day. It is possible that a very considerable number of people in London stuck to their houses through Monday morning. Certain it is that many died at home, suffocated by the black smoke. Until about midday, the Pool of London was an astonishing scene. Steamboats and shipping of all sorts lay there, tempted by the enormous sums of money offered by fugitives, and it is said that many who swam out to these vessels were thrust off with boat hooks and drowned. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the thinning remnant of a cloud of the black vapor appeared between the arches of Blackfriars Bridge. At that, the pool became a scene of mad confusion, fighting and collision, and for some time a multitude of boats and barges jammed the northern arch of the Tower Bridge, and the sailors and lightermen had to fight savagely against the people who swarmed upon them from the river front. People were actually clambering down the piers of the bridge from above, when, an hour later, a Martian appeared beyond the clock tower and waded down the river. Nothing but wreckage floated above Limehouse. Of the falling of the fifth cylinder I have presently to tell. The sixth star fell at Wimbledon. My brother, keeping watch beside the women in the chaise in a meadow, saw the green flash of it far beyond the hills. On Tuesday, the little party, still set upon getting across the sea, made its way through the swarming country toward Colchester. The news that the Martians were now in possession of the whole of London was confirmed. They had been seen at Highgate and even, it was said, at Neasden. But they did not come into my brother's view until the morrow. That day, the scattered multitudes began to realize the urgent need of provisions. As they grew hungry and the rights of property ceased to be regarded, Farmers went out to defend their cattle sheds, granaries, and ripening root crops with weapons in their hands. A number of people now, like my brother, turned their faces eastward, and there were some desperate souls even going back toward London to get food. These were chiefly people from northern suburbs whose knowledge of the Black Smoke came by hearsay. He heard that about half the members of the government had gathered at Birmingham and that enormous quantities of high explosives were being prepared to be used in automatic mines across the Midland counties. He was also told that the Midland Railway Company had replaced the desertions of the first day's panic, had resumed traffic, and was running northward trains from St. Albans to relieve congestion of those home counties. There was also a placard in Chipping Ongar announcing that large stores of flour were available in the northern towns and that within 24 hours bread would be distributed among the starving people in the neighborhood. But this intelligence did not deter him from the plan of escape he had formed, and the three pressed eastward all day and heard no more of bread distribution than this promise. Nor, as a matter of fact, did anyone else hear more of it. That night fell the seventh star, falling upon Primrose Hill. It fell while Miss Elphinstone was watching, for she took that duty alternately with my brother. She saw it. On Wednesday, the three fugitives, they had passed the night in a field of unripe wheat, reached Chelmsford, and there a body of the inhabitants, calling itself the Committee of Public Supply, seized the pony as provisions, and would give nothing in exchange for it but the promise of a share in it the next day. There were rumors of Martians at Epping, and news of the destruction of Waltham Abbey powder mills in a vain attempt to blow up one of the invaders. People were watching for Martians here from the church towers. My brother, very luckily for him as it chanced, preferred to push on at once to the coast rather than wait for food, although all three of them were very hungry. By midday they passed through Tillingham, which, strangely enough, seemed to be quite silent and deserted, save for a few furtive plunderers hunting for food. Near Tillingham they suddenly came in sight of the sea, and the most amazing crowd of shipping of all sorts that it is possible to imagine. For after the sailors could no longer come up the Thames, they came on to the Essex coast, to Harwich and Walton and Clacton, and afterwards to Foulness and Shoebury, to bring off the people. To bring off the people. They lay in a huge sickle-shaped curve that vanished into mist at last toward the Naze. Close inshore was a multitude of fishing smacks, English, Scotch, French, Dutch, and Swedish, steam launches from the Thames, yachts, electric boats, and beyond were the big ships, filthy colliers, trim merchantmen, cattle ships, passenger boats, petroleum tankers, ocean tramps, even an old white transport, neat white and gray liners from Southampton and Hamburg, and along the blue coast, along the Blackwater, my brother could make out dimly a dense swarm of boats, chaffering with the people on the beach, a swarm which also extended up the Blackwater almost to Malden. About 2 miles out lay an ironclad, very low in the water, almost, to my brother's perception, like a waterlogged ship. This was the ram Thunder Child. It was the only warship in sight, but far away to the right over the smooth surface of the sea, for that day there was dead calm, lay a serpent of black smoke to mark the next ironclads of the Channel Fleet. They hovered in an extended line, steam up and ready for action across the Thames estuary during the course of the Martian conquest, vigilant yet powerless to prevent it. At the sight of the sea, Mrs. Elphinstone, in spite of the assurances of her sister-in-law, gave way to panic. She had never been out of England before. She would rather die than trust herself friendless in a foreign country, and so forth. She seemed, poor woman, to imagine that the French and the Martians might prove very similar. She had been growing increasingly hysterical, fearful, and depressed during the 2 days' journey. Her great idea was to return to Stanmore. Things had always been well and safe at Stanmore. They would find George at Stanmore. It was with the greatest difficulty they could get her down to the beach, where presently my brother succeeded in attracting the attention of some men on a paddled steamer from the Thames. They sent a boat and drove a bargain for £36 for the three. The steamer was going, these men said, to Ostend. It was about 2 o'clock when my brother, having paid their fares at the gangway, found himself safely aboard the steamboat with his charges. There was food aboard, albeit at exorbitant prices, and the three of them contrived to eat a meal on one of the seats forward. There were already a couple of score of passengers aboard, some of whom had expended their last money in securing a passage, but the captain lay off the black water until 5 in the afternoon, picking up passengers until the seated decks were even dangerously crowded. He would probably have remained longer had it not been for the sound of guns that began that hour in the south. As if in answer, the ironclad seaward fired a small gun and hoisted a string of flags. A jet of smoke sprang out from her funnels. Some of the passengers were of the opinion this firing came from shoeberryness, until it was noticed that it was growing louder. At the same time, far away in the southeast, the masts and upper works of 3 ironclads rose one after the other out of the sea, beneath the clouds of black smoke. But my brother's attention speedily reverted to the distant firing in the south. He fancied he saw a column of smoke rising out of the distant gray haze. The little steamer was already flapping her way eastward of the big crescent of shipping, and the low Essex coast was growing blue and hazy when a Martian appeared, small and faint, in the remote distance, advancing along the muddy coast from the direction of Foulness. At that, the captain on the bridge swore at the top of his voice with fear and anger at his own delay, and the paddles seemed infected with this terror. Every soul aboard stood at the bulwarks or on the seats of the steamer and stared at that distant shape, higher than the trees or church towers inland, and advancing with a leisurely parody of a human stride. It was the first Martian my brother had seen, and he stood more amazed than terrified, watching this Titan advance deliberately toward the shipping, wading farther and farther into the water as the coast fell away. Then, far away beyond the crouch, came another striding over some stunted trees, and then yet another, still farther off, wading deeply through what appeared to be a shiny mud flat hanging halfway up between the sea and the sky. They were all stalking seaward as if to intercept the escape of vessels crowded between Foulness and the Naze. In spite of the throbbing exertions of the little paddle boat's engines and the pouring foam that her wheels flung behind her, she receded with terrifying slowness from this ominous advance. Glancing northwestward, my brother saw the large crescent of shipping already writhing with the approaching terror. One ship passing behind another, another coming around from the broadside to end on, steamships whistling and giving off volumes of steam, sails being let out, launches rushing hither and thither. He was so fascinated by this and by the creeping danger away to the left that he had no eyes for anything seaward. And then a swift movement of the steamboat, she had suddenly come round to avoid being run down, flung him headlong from his seat upon which he was standing. There was a shouting all about him, a trampling of feet, and a cheer that seemed to be answered faintly. The steamboat lurched and rolled him over on his hands. He sprang to his feet, and he saw to starboard, and not 100 yards from their heeling, pitching boat, the vast bulk of the blade of a plow tearing through the water, tossing it on either side in huge waves of foam that leapt towards the steamer, flinging their paddles helplessly in the air and sucking down her deck down almost to the waterline. A douche of spray blinded my brother for a moment. When his eyes were clear again, he saw the monster had passed and was rushing landward. Big iron upper works rose out of this headlong structure, and from that twin funnels projected and spat a smoking blast shot with fire. It was the torpedo ram, Thunder Child, steaming headlong, coming to the rescue of the threatened shipping. Keeping his footing on the heaviest deck by clutching the bulwarks, my brother looking past this charging leviathan at the Martians again. He saw the three of them now close together and standing so far out to sea that their tripod supports were almost entirely submerged. Thus sunken and seen in remote perspective, they seemed far less formidable than the huge iron bulk in whose wake the steamer was pitching so helplessly. It would have seemed it would seem they were regarding this new antagonist with astonishment. To their intelligence, it may be, the giant was even such another as themselves. The Thunder Child fired no gun, but simply drove full speed toward them. It was probably not her not firing that enabled her to get as near the enemy as she did. They did not know what to make of her. One shell, and they would have sent her to the bottom with a heat ray. She was steaming at such a pace that in a minute she seemed halfway between the steamboat and the Martians, a diminishing black bulk against the receding horizontal expanse of the Essex coast. Suddenly, the foremost Martian lowered his tube and discharged a canister of black gas at the ironclad. It hit her larboard side and glanced off with an inky jet that rolled away to seaward, an unfolding torrent of black smoke from which the ironclad drove clear. To the watchers from the steamer, low in the water and with sun in their eyes, it seemed as though she were already among the Martians. They saw the gaunt figures separating and rising out of the water as they retreated shoreward, and one of them raised the camera-like generator of the heat ray. He held it, pointing obliquely downward, and a bank of steam sprang from the ship at its touch. It must have driven through the iron of the ship's side like white-hot iron rod through paper. A flicker of flame went up through the rising steam, and then the Martian reeled and staggered. In another moment he was cut down, and a great body of water and steam shot high in the air. The guns of the Thunder Child sounded through the reek, going off one after the other, and one shot splashed the water close to the steamer, ricocheted toward the other flying ships to the north, and smashed a smack to matchwood. smashed a smack to matchwood. But no one heeded that very much. At the sight of the Martian's collapse, the captain on the bridge yelled inarticulately, and all the crowding passengers on the steamer's stern shouted together, and then they yelled again. For surging out beyond the white tumult drove something long and black, the flames streaming from its middle parts, its ventilators and funnels spouting fire. She was still alive. The steering gear, it seems, was intact, and her engines working. She seemed headed straight for a second Martian, and was within 100 yards of him when the heat ray came to bear. Then, with a violent thud, a blinding flash, her decks, her funnels leaped upward. The Martian staggered with the violence of her explosion, and in another moment the flaming wreckage, still driving forward with the impetus of its pace, had struck him and crumpled him like a thing of cardboard. My brother shouted involuntarily. A boiling tumult of steam hid everything. Again. "Two!" yelled the captain. Everyone was shouting. The whole steamer from end to end rang with frantic cheering that was taken up first by one and then by all. In the crowding multitude of ships, the boats and boats that were driving out to sea. The steam hung upon the water for many minutes, hiding the third Martian and the coast altogether. And all this time the boat was paddling steadily out to sea and away from the fight. When at last the confusion cleared, the drifting bank of black vapor intervened, and nothing of the Thunder Child could be made out, nor could the third Martian be seen. But the ironclads to seaward were now quite close and standing in toward the shore. The little vessel continued to bear its way seaward, and the ironclads receded slowly toward the coast, which was hidden still by a marbled bank of vapor, part steam, part black gas, eddying and combining in the strangest way. The fleet of refugees was scattering to the northeast. Several smacks were sailing between the ironclads and the steamboat. After a time, and before they reached the sinking cloud bank, the warships turned northward, then abruptly went about and passed into the thickening haze of evening southward. The coast grew faint, and at last indistinguishable amid the low banks of clouds that were gathering about the sinking sun. When suddenly out of the golden haze of the sunset came the vibration of guns, and a form of black shadows moving. Every one struggled to the rail of the steamer and peered into the blinding furnace of the west. But nothing was to be distinguished clearly. A mass of smoke rose slanting and barred the face of the sun. The steamboat throbbed on its way through the interminable suspense. The sun sank into gray clouds. The sky flushed and darkened. The evening star trembled into sight, rather. It was deep twilight when the captain cried out and pointed. My brother strained his eyes. Something rushed up into the sky, out of the grayness, rushed slantingly upward at very swiftly into the luminous clearness above the clouds in the western sky, something flat and broad and very large that swept around like a vast curve, grew smaller, sank slower, and vanished again into the gray mystery of the night. As it flew, it rained down darkness on the land. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 17. Our hero's brother is now on a steamship. It is on its way to France and hopefully safety. The ram ship, the Thunder Child, is attacked it and brought down two Martian tripods to the cheers of everyone. And then this is kind of a marking point here, only in the sense that this is the end of what is called Book One of War of the Worlds. The next book, Book Two, see that? It's entitled "The Earth Under the Martians," and we'll read that starting on Monday at 4 p.m. It starts over again with a new chapter one, but I think for the sake of clarity, we'll just keep on going and we'll call it chapter 18, and just kind of keep up with the current numbering system that we have. But we'll hold on to this until Monday at 4 p.m. and we'll read the rest of it. I also wanted to point out just a quick side note here, just a bit of trivia. Um, the heroic actions of the sailors on board the ship, the Thunder Child, actually spawned a novel. A fan of War of the Worlds, an author named C.A. Powell, wrote a separate book just talking about this ship, and it was called The Last Days of the Thunder Child. And it basically takes the story of the crew of the ship, what had happened before this, and what brought them into the Thames, basically, and their attack on the Martian tripods. So I'll put a link to that, a Goodreads link on the website here, but I've not read it myself, so I cannot say whether it is a good story or not. I do find it interesting that War of the Worlds has kind of spawned a lot of different stories, a lot of pastiches that somebody else will come up and pick up a certain thread from one of the characters or one of the situations, and then we'll sort of go off in another direction, and I find that's a good thing. Usually, you can always sort of see people's appreciation for classic stories when they have an effect on you, like War of the Worlds clearly does. So, otherwise, thank you very much for joining me for today's Adventure and Mystery Book Club. Hope you have a very good weekend. Like I said, we will see you again, hopefully Monday at 4 p.m., where we will start Book 2 of War of the Worlds, and we'll see what happens then. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. We'll see you.